What would you do if your millionaire husband kicked you out of a car on a dangerous highway while you're 7 months pregnant? Sarah thought her life was over when David abandoned her in designer heels on that dark road. But the Uber driver who refused to leave her behind wasn't just any stranger. He was hiding a secret that would change everything. A secret worth $500 million. A promise made to a dying soldier 12 years ago. And a plan for the ultimate revenge against the man who destroyed innocent lives to build his empire. This is the incredible true story of betrayal, justice, and the power of keeping promises. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story will blow your mind. Let's begin. Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble-floored kitchen of their $3 million penthouse, her 7-month pregnant belly making it difficult to reach the top shelf. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the pristine white countertops that she spent hours cleaning each day. "Sarah, where's my Patek Philippe?" David's voice boomed from his home office, sharp and demanding as always. She froze, remembering the expensive watch sitting on the bathroom counter where she'd been cleaning around it. Her hands trembled slightly as she made her way toward the master bedroom, each step careful and measured. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anxiety. "It's in the bathroom. David," she called back, her voice barely carrying down the hallway. "Well, get it. I have a video call with investors in 10 minutes. Sarah entered the pristine marble bathroom and carefully lifted the $50,000 timepiece. The weight of it always surprised her. Such a small object representing more money than her father had ever made in a year as a high school janitor back in Ohio. As she turned to leave, her rounded belly caught the edge of the bathroom door. The watch slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor with a sound that made her heart stop. "What was that?" David appeared in the doorway instantly, his ice blue eyes scanning the scene. When he saw his precious watch on the floor, his face transformed from concern to fury. "You dropped my watch." His voice was dangerously quiet. "David, I'm sorry. Do you have any idea what that cost?" He snatched the watch from the floor, examining it for scratches. $50,000. "Sarah, more than you made in your entire pathetic teaching career." The words stung because they were true. Before meeting David at that military charity event 2 years ago, she'd been a high school English teacher in rural Ohio, making $37,000 a year and loving every moment of it. Her students had adored her, and she'd felt like she was making a real difference in their lives. Now she spent her days cleaning a penthouse that never seemed to get dirty and walking on eggshells around a man who seemed to take pleasure in reminding her of her humble origins. "I said, I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," David snapped, adjusting his silk tie. "Maybe if you actually contributed something to this marriage, besides being a financial burden, you'd understand the value of things." He stormed back toward his office, pausing in the doorway. "And for God's sake, try not to break anything else while I'm working. Some of us actually have important things to do." Sarah sank onto the edge of the bathtub, fighting back tears. This wasn't the man she'd married. Or maybe it was. And she'd just been too dazzled by his wealth and attention to see the truth. David Blackstone, tech entrepreneur and self-made millionaire, had swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and promises of a life beyond her wildest dreams. The dreams had turned into a nightmare of isolation and emotional abuse. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister back home. "How's married life treating you, Mrs. Millionaire?" Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. How could she explain that she'd never felt more alone in her life, that the man who'd promised to love and cherish her had instead systematically destroyed her confidence and cut her off from everyone she'd ever cared about. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Sarah placed both hands on her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's going to figure this out." But as she heard David's voice rising in his office, berating some unfortunate employee over the phone, Sarah wondered if she was making a promise she couldn't keep. The charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton was everything David lived for, an opportunity to network, show off his wealth, and remind everyone of his success. Sarah stood beside him in a maternity gown that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, smiling politely at tech executives and their wives while her feet ached in designer heels. "David, darling!" Melissa Carter glided toward them, her red dress hugging her curves perfectly. As David's business partner and the co-founder of their latest venture, Melissa commanded attention wherever she went. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." She air-kissed David on both cheeks before turning to Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And Sarah, how maternal you look," Melissa said, her gaze traveling from Sarah's swollen feet to her fuller face. "Pregnancy really changes everything, doesn't it?" "It's been wonderful," Sarah replied, though the words felt hollow. "I'm sure it has." Melissa laughed, a tinkling sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Though I have to say, I don't know how you do it. I could never sacrifice my body like that. Or my career, for that matter." David chuckled appreciatively. "Well, not everyone has your drive, Melissa. Some people are content with simpler lives." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was a teacher. I had a career that I loved." "Oh, that's right," Melissa said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You taught high school in, where was it again? Some little farm town." "Ohio," Sarah said quietly. "Right, Ohio." Melissa exchanged a look with David. "How sweet. I'm sure those children really benefited from your—" "What did you teach again? Home economics?" "English literature," Sarah corrected, her voice growing stronger. "I taught Shakespeare, Steinbeck, Maya Angelou. I helped students discover the power of words and stories to change their lives." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah realized she'd spoken with more passion than she'd felt in months. Melissa's smile became razor sharp. "How quaint. Though I suppose not everyone can understand the complexities of building actual businesses that create jobs and drive innovation." "That's enough," Sarah said, surprising herself with her firmness. "I may not run a tech company, but education matters. Teachers matter. We shape the future, one student at a time." David's face darkened. "Sarah." "No, David. I'm tired of being made to feel ashamed of who I was before I met you. I was good at my job. I made a difference in people's lives." The small crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing the tension. Melissa looked delighted by the confrontation, while David appeared mortified. "We need some air," David said through gritted teeth, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Excuse us." He marched her toward the exit, his grip tight enough to leave marks. Sarah struggled to keep up in her heels, her pregnant belly making quick movement difficult. "What the hell was that?" David hissed as they reached the hotel lobby. "I was defending myself," Sarah said. "And my profession." "Your profession?" David's voice rose. "You haven't worked in 2 years? You're embarrassing me in front of my business partners." Melissa was being deliberately cruel. Melissa is brilliant and successful, and she was making conversation. "You're so insecure that you can't handle being around accomplished women without making a scene." The words hit like physical blows, Sarah had once been confident, secure in her abilities and her worth. Now she questioned every thought, every feeling, wondering if David was right about her inadequacies. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "Fine. I'll call for the car." David pulled out his phone, his jaw tight with anger. "But this conversation isn't over. We're going to discuss your behavior tonight." As they waited for their Uber outside the hotel, Sarah watched the city lights blur through her tears. She thought about her students back in Ohio, how their faces would light up when they understood a difficult passage or discovered a new favorite author. When had she stopped believing in her own worth? The black sedan pulled up, and David opened the door with unnecessary force. "Get in," he commanded. As Sarah settled into the back seat, she caught the driver's eyes in the rearview mirror. They were kind eyes, weathered and understanding, belonging to a middle-aged Hispanic man who nodded politely. She had no idea that this stranger was about to change her life forever. The tension in the car was suffocating. David sat rigid beside Sarah, his silence more threatening than his usual verbal attacks. The driver navigated through downtown traffic with practiced ease, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his passengers. "Sir, there's construction ahead," the driver said in a respectful voice. "I can take the highway route. It'll add about 10 minutes, but the ride will be smoother." "Just get us home," David snapped, not looking up from his phone where he was furiously typing messages, probably to Melissa. Sarah stared out the window at the city passing by, thinking about the woman she used to be. Back in Ohio, she'd stood up to difficult parents, advocated for struggling students, and commanded respect in faculty meetings. How had she become this frightened, apologetic version of herself? The answer was sitting beside her, radiating disapproval like heat from a furnace. "You know what your problem is." "Sarah." David's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You have no concept of your place in the world." She turned to look at him, seeing the cold calculation in his eyes that she'd somehow missed during their courtship. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're a small-town nobody who got lucky. I pulled you out of poverty, gave you a life most women would kill for, and instead of gratitude, you give me attitude in front of my colleagues." The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror again, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. "David, please." "Please what?" "Please continue to let you embarrass me. Please pretend that your little teaching job was anything more than babysitting teenagers in a dead-end town." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and they found their mark. Sarah felt tears beginning to flow, her hormones making it impossible to maintain her composure. "I loved my job," she whispered. "You loved mediocrity," David countered. "You loved being a big fish in a tiny pond because you knew you could never compete in the real world." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" David's voice grew louder. "Look at you now. You can't even handle a simple conversation with successful people without falling apart. You're weak, Sarah, pathetically weak." The driver had been taking the highway route as suggested, but now he was slowing down, pulling toward the shoulder. "Sir," the driver said carefully, "is everything all right back there?" "Everything's fine," David snapped. "Keep driving." But the car had already stopped on the side of the busy highway, hazard lights blinking. Sarah was sobbing now, her hands cradling her belly as if to protect her unborn child from the verbal assault. The baby was kicking frantically, responding to her elevated stress levels. "You know what?" David said suddenly, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone. "I can't stand another minute of your self-pity." He reached across Sarah and opened her door, letting in the sounds of traffic rushing past at 70 miles per hour. "Get out!" Sarah stared at him in shock. "What?" "You heard me." Get out of the car." The driver turned around, his face filled with alarm. "Sir, this is a major highway. It's not safe." "Did I ask for your opinion?" David snarled. "This is between me and my wife." "David, you can't be serious," Sarah said, looking at the rushing traffic just feet away. "I'm 7 months pregnant. Maybe some time to think about your behavior will do you good." David's face was completely calm now, which somehow made it worse than his anger. "Find your own way home, you embarrassing piece of trash." The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah looked at this man she'd married, this man whose child she was carrying, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Or maybe she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Sir," the driver said firmly, "I can't allow this. It's not safe for a pregnant woman to be on the highway at night." "You work for me," David said coldly. "I'm telling you to drive away." The driver met David's eyes in the mirror, and Sarah saw something steel-like in his expression. "No, sir, I won't do that." For a moment, David looked genuinely surprised. He wasn't used to being refused, especially by someone he considered beneath him. "Fine," David said, reaching for his wallet. "Here's your fare. Consider this ride over." He threw a handful of bills at the driver and climbed out of the car, slamming the door behind him. Within seconds, another Uber arrived. Apparently, he'd already called for backup transportation. As David's car disappeared into traffic, Sarah found herself alone with a stranger on a dangerous highway, pregnant and in designer heels, with nowhere to go and no one to call. The driver turned around to face her, and she saw kindness in his weathered face. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm not leaving you here. That would be wrong on every level." "I don't have anywhere to go," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. "We'll figure something out," the driver said. "I'm Jimmy Rodriguez. What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Okay, Sarah. Let's get you somewhere safe, and then we'll work on the rest." As Jimmy carefully pulled back into traffic, Sarah wondered if accepting help from this stranger was the smartest thing to do, but sitting alone on a highway seemed infinitely more dangerous than trusting the man who'd refused to abandon her. She had no idea that Jimmy Rodriguez was about to become the most important person in her life. Jimmy drove in thoughtful silence for several minutes, occasionally checking on Sarah in the rearview mirror. She sat huddled in the corner of the back seat, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup streaked with tears. The contrast between her obvious wealth and her current vulnerability wasn't lost on him. "There's a clean motel about 15 minutes from here," Jimmy said gently. "Nothing fancy, but it's safe, and the owner's a good man. Would that work for tonight?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the kindness in his voice. I don't know. I've never stayed in a motel before." The admission made her sound naive even to herself. Before David, she'd lived simply but comfortably. After marrying him, she'd become accustomed to 5-star hotels and luxury accommodations. "It's not the Ritz, but the sheets are clean and the doors have good locks," Jimmy said. "Most importantly, you'll be safe there." "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked. "You don't even know me?" Jimmy glanced in the mirror, and she saw something shift in his expression, a shadow of old pain mixed with determination. "Let's just say I know what it's like when someone needs help and has nowhere else to turn." The Sunset Motel was exactly as Jimmy had described, clean but basic, with faded blue doors and a neon sign that flickered intermittently. Jimmy parked near the office and turned to face Sarah. "Wait here. I'll get you a room." "I can pay for it myself," Sarah said quickly, then realized she wasn't sure if that was true. David controlled all their accounts, and she only had a small amount of cash in her purse. "I'm sure you can," Jimmy replied diplomatically. But let me handle this tonight. We can sort out the details tomorrow. He disappeared into the motel office, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Through the windshield, she could see him talking to an elderly man behind the counter, gesturing occasionally in her direction. Both men looked concerned rather than suspicious. When Jimmy returned, he had a room key and a gentle smile. Room 12, it's quiet, away from the highway noise. The manager's name is Frank. He's a good guy. If you need anything during the night, just call the office. Sarah took the key with trembling fingers. I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me yet, Jimmy said. Let me help you to your room, then we'll talk about tomorrow. Room 12 was small but scrupulously clean, with a double bed, a small table, and a television mounted on the wall. The bathroom was tiny but functional. To Sarah, who'd been living in marble and crystal opulence, it felt oddly comforting, like the modest apartment she'd rented during her teaching years. It's perfect, she said, sinking into the room's single chair. Jimmy studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. That man who left you on the highway, is he always like that? Sarah's first instinct was to defend David, to make excuses for his behavior. But sitting in this simple motel room with this kind stranger who'd just saved her life, the truth came spilling out. He wasn't always this bad, she said quietly. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it. When we first met, he seemed so sophisticated, so worldly. I thought he was rescuing me from my small-town life. And now I realize I wasn't trapped in my old life. I was happy there. I was useful. I mattered to my students. She looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. I don't know who I am anymore. Jimmy sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Can I tell you something about myself? He asked. Sarah nodded. I've been driving for Uber for 3 years now. But before that, I was in the military, Marines, did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Thank you for your service, Sarah said automatically. The response drilled into her from her small-town upbringing. I appreciate that. But what I want to tell you is about my best friend over there. His name was Tommy Mitchell. Sarah's head snapped up. Mitchell. Yeah, Tommy Mitchell from Ohio. Joined the Marines right out of high school because he wanted to serve his country and earn money for college. Jimmy's voice grew soft with memory. He talked about his daughter constantly. Smart as a whip, he said. Wanted to be a teacher. Sarah's heart began to race. What was his daughter's name? Sarah, Jimmy said gently. Sarah Mitchell. She was 16 when Tommy died in a roadside bombing. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd look out for her if she ever needed help. The room began to spin. Sarah gripped the arms of her chair, staring at this man who just revealed himself to be connected to the most painful chapter of her life. My father, she whispered. You knew my father. Tommy was the best man I ever served with, Jimmy said. He saved my life more times than I can count, and when he died, I made him a promise. I've been looking for ways to honor that promise for 12 years. But how did you... the chances of you being my Uber driver... I've been keeping track of you, Jimmy admitted. Not in a creepy way. But I wanted to make sure you were okay. When I saw your name on the ride request tonight, I almost couldn't believe it. Sarah stared at him, processing this impossible coincidence. So when you refused to leave me on the highway? I would have done that for anyone, Jimmy said firmly. But knowing who you are, knowing what your father would say if I'd driven away and left his little girl in danger, he shook his head. There was no way that was happening. For the first time in hours, Sarah felt truly safe. Not because she was away from David, but because she was with someone who'd loved her father, someone who cared about her well-being with no ulterior motives. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you get some rest," Jimmy said, standing up. "Tomorrow, we figure out your options. But Sarah, yes, you're not alone anymore. Your father made me promise to look out for you, and I intend to keep that promise." Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through cheap motel curtains and the unfamiliar sound of traffic from the nearby highway. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The gala, David's cruelty, being abandoned on the roadside, and the miraculous appearance of Jimmy Rodriguez. A gentle knock on her door made her startle. "Sarah, it's Jimmy. I brought breakfast." She opened the door to find him holding 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like heaven. "How did you sleep?" he asked, settling into the room's single chair while she sat on the bed. "Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted, surprised to realize it was true. Despite everything, she'd slept deeply and peacefully. Jimmy handed her a coffee and a wrapped breakfast sandwich. "We need to talk about your situation." Sarah nodded, biting into the sandwich. It was simple: egg, cheese, and sausage on a toasted English muffin, but it tasted better than any of the elaborate meals David's personal chef had prepared. "I've been thinking about your husband," Jimmy continued. "Something about him bothered me last night, beyond just his behavior toward you." "What do you mean?" The name David Blackstone, I knew I'd heard it before, so I did some research this morning. Jimmy pulled out his phone. "Tell me, what do you know about how he built his company?" Sarah frowned. "He developed some kind of revolutionary software, a platform that helps companies manage their data more efficiently. He always said he was a self-made genius." "That's the story he tells," Jimmy said carefully. "But I found some interesting articles from about 5 years ago. Do you remember hearing about a programmer named Marcus Webb? The name was vaguely familiar." "I think so. Didn't he commit suicide?" "He did. But before he died, he accused David of stealing his code, the exact same platform that made David rich." Sarah set down her sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone. "That can't be true. Marcus Webb filed a lawsuit against David just weeks before his death. He claimed they'd been partners, working together on the software. But David pushed him out right before the launch and took all the credit." "What happened to the lawsuit?" "It died with Marcus. His family was too devastated and too poor to continue fighting David's expensive legal team." Jimmy's expression was grim. "But the accusations were detailed and specific. Technical details that would be hard to fake." Sarah felt sick, but not from morning sickness. If this was true, it meant her husband wasn't just emotionally abusive, he was a thief who'd driven a man to suicide. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because knowledge is power," Jimmy said simply. "And right now, you don't have much power in your marriage." That was certainly true. David controlled every aspect of their life together: their home, their finances, their social circle. He'd systematically isolated her from her friends and family back in Ohio, convincing her they were jealous of her new life. "Even if this is all true, what can I do about it? I'm 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go and no money of my own." "You might have more options than you think," Jimmy said. "But first, we need proof. Real proof." "You mean like documents, evidence?" "Exactly. Does David keep business files at home?" Sarah thought about David's home office, with its locked filing cabinets and password-protected computer. Yes, but everything's locked up. He's paranoid about corporate espionage. What about his laptop? Does he ever leave it unattended? Sometimes when he's in the shower or taking calls in another room. Sarah felt a flutter of possibility mixed with terror. But Jimmy, if he caught me, he won't catch you if we're smart about it. And Sarah, think about Marcus Webb's family. Think about how many other people David might hurt if someone doesn't stop him. The words hit home. During her teaching years, Sarah had always stood up for her students when they were being bullied or treated unfairly. The idea that she might be living off stolen money, money that had cost a man his life, made her feel complicit in David's crimes. What would I be looking for? Emails, financial records, anything that shows communication with Marcus Webb or references to the original software development. If David really did steal the code, there will be evidence. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking about the scared, isolated woman she'd become and comparing her to the strong, principled teacher she used to be. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Jimmy smiled, and she saw approval in his eyes. The same kind of approval she used to see from her father when she'd done something brave. "Your dad would be proud of you," he said softly. "I hope so. I feel like I've let him down these past 2 years. Tommy raised you to be strong and independent. You haven't lost those qualities. They're just buried under someone else's expectations. It's time to dig them back up." As Jimmy drove her back toward the penthouse, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. For the first time since her wedding day, she was taking action instead of simply enduring. She had no idea that David was already planning his next move, or that her decision to fight back was about to put both her and her baby in terrible danger. Sarah's hands trembled as she slipped David's laptop from his desk while he was in the master bathroom shower. The password screen appeared, and she tried the usual combinations: his birthday, their wedding date, the name of his first company. Nothing worked. Then she remembered something he'd said during one of his self-aggrandizing stories about his early success. She typed Marcus 3 and held her breath. The screen unlocked. Her stomach lurched at the implications. David had been using his victim's name as a password, like some kind of sick trophy. Sarah quickly navigated to his email folders, searching for anything related to Marcus Webb. What she found made her blood run cold. Email after email between David and Marcus, dating back 6 years. In the early messages, they were clearly partners, collaborating on code development and discussing their shared vision for the software platform. Marcus's emails were full of technical innovations and creative solutions. Then, gradually, David's tone changed. He started questioning Marcus's contributions, suggesting they needed to clarify ownership of various components. Marcus's responses grew increasingly defensive and confused. The final email exchange was devastating. Marcus had written, "David, we built this together. You can't just cut me out now that we're ready to launch. This software is my life's work." David's reply was cold and calculating. "Marcus, I have documentation showing that all the core innovations came from my research. You were hired as a contractor to implement my vision. I'm afraid you've misunderstood our relationship." Marcus's last email was heartbreaking. "You're destroying me, David. This platform was going to be our legacy. How can you live with yourself?" David had never replied. Sarah photographed the email exchanges with her phone, her heart racing. But as she scrolled through more folders, she found something even worse: financial records showing that David had systematically stolen from Marcus, gradually shifting ownership of their shared assets into his own name while Marcus was battling depression and fighting the lawsuit. A sound from the bathroom made her freeze. The shower had stopped. Sarah quickly closed the laptop and hurried back to the living room, settling onto the couch with a magazine just as David emerged from the bedroom, his hair still damp. "You're up early," he said, his tone neutral but watchful. "The baby was kicking. I couldn't sleep." David studied her face for a moment, and Sarah fought to keep her expression calm. "Did he suspect something? I have meetings all day," he said finally. "Try not to break anything while I'm gone." The casual cruelty stung, but Sarah just nodded. "Of course." After David left, Sarah immediately called Jimmy. "I got it," she said. "The emails, the financial records, everything. Jimmy, it's even worse than we thought. Can you get out of there, bring the evidence?" "I think so. He'll be gone for hours. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street. We're taking this straight to the FBI." Sarah quickly gathered the printed emails and financial documents she'd managed to copy, along with the photos on her phone. She felt lighter than she had in months, empowered by the knowledge that she was finally doing something meaningful. But as she headed for the door, it opened before she could reach it. David stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly. Sarah's mind raced. Just to the doctor. Prenatal checkup." "Really?" David stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Because I just got a very interesting call from our building security. Apparently, you've been photographing documents in my office." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She'd forgotten about the security cameras David had installed throughout the penthouse. "David, I can explain. Can you?" He moved closer, and Sarah saw something dangerous in his eyes that she'd never seen before. "Can you explain why my pregnant wife is stealing my private business documents?" "I know what you did to Marcus Webb," Sarah said, surprising herself with her own courage. "I know you stole his work and drove him to suicide." David's laugh was cold and humorless. "Marcus Webb was weak. He couldn't handle the competitive nature of the tech industry. You destroyed him. You stole everything from him and then watched him die." "I took what was rightfully mine," David said calmly. "Marcus was a brilliant programmer, but he lacked vision. He lacked the killer instinct necessary to succeed in business. He was your friend. He was a tool. And apparently, so are you." David pulled out his phone. "Security. Yes, I need to report a theft. My wife has stolen sensitive corporate documents." Sarah stared at him in horror. "You can't be serious." "Corporate espionage is a felony, Sarah, especially when it involves trade secrets worth millions of dollars. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. And you've just committed a crime against my company." David's smile was terrifying in its coldness. "Did you really think you could outsmart me? You're a small-town teacher who barely graduated from a state college. I built an empire." The sound of sirens outside made Sarah's knees weak. "David, please, think about the baby." "I am thinking about the baby," David replied. "I'm thinking that my child deserves better than a criminal for a mother." The police knocked on the door, and Sarah realized that David had planned this perfectly. He'd let her gather the evidence, let her incriminate herself, and then used her actions against her. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah thought about Jimmy waiting at the coffee shop, about her father who died serving his country, and about the baby growing inside her who was about to be born into this nightmare. David stood in the doorway of their penthouse, watching his pregnant wife being led away in handcuffs, his expression showing no more emotion than if he were watching a particularly boring television program. "Make sure she understands the charges," he told the officers. "Corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty." As the elevator doors closed, Sarah realized that David hadn't just stolen Marcus Webb's life's work. He'd stolen her life too, and now he was going to use the law itself to destroy her, just as he'd destroyed Marcus. The only difference was that she was still alive to fight back. The Multnomah County Jail was everything Sarah had never imagined she'd experience. Harsh fluorescent lighting, the smell of disinfectant mixed with human desperation, and the constant noise of doors slamming and women arguing. She sat on a narrow cot in a cell shared with 3 other women, her designer maternity dress now wrinkled and stained. Her cellmates were surprisingly kind. Maria, a young woman facing drug charges, had given Sarah an extra blanket. Linda, an older woman arrested for shoplifting, shared her knowledge of the jail's systems and routines. Even Tasha, who was in for assault, showed unexpected gentleness when she noticed Sarah wincing from sharp kicks from her baby. "First time inside?" Maria asked on Sarah's second night. Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "It shows," Tasha said, not unkindly. "You got that deer in headlights look. What they get you for corporate espionage," Sarah whispered, the words still seeming surreal. The 3 women exchanged glances. "Damn, girl," Linda said. "That's some white-collar shit. What did you do? Sell company secrets to the Russians?" "I tried to expose my husband's crimes," Sarah said, then found herself telling these strangers the entire story: David's theft of Marcus's work, his systematic abuse, and his manipulation of the legal system to destroy her. When she finished, the cell was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband's a psychopath," Maria said finally. "Classic narcissist with sociopathic tendencies. I dated one once. They'll destroy you and make you think it's your fault." "But you got evidence, right?" Tasha asked. "Proof that he's the real criminal." "I had it, but now it's all considered stolen property obtained illegally. My lawyer says it's inadmissible in court." The court-appointed attorney, an overworked public defender named Janet Mills, had delivered the devastating news that morning. Not only was Sarah's evidence unusable, but David's legal team was painting her as an unstable, gold-digging wife who tried to extort her wealthy husband. "They're saying you're mentally unstable?" Linda asked. "David's claiming I've had severe postpartum depression, that the pregnancy has made me paranoid and delusional." Sarah's voice broke. "He's got doctors who've never even examined me willing to testify that I need psychiatric treatment." "What about the baby?" Maria asked gently. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the constant movement of her child, the only good thing to come from her marriage to David. "He's filed for emergency custody. Says I'm an unfit mother who poses a danger to the baby." The women were quiet, understanding the implications. David wasn't just destroying Sarah, he was taking her child too. "This Jimmy guy," Tasha said. "The one who knew your dad. He trying to help." "He can't. David's lawyers got a restraining order against him, claiming he's a dangerous stranger who's been stalking me. If Jimmy comes within 500 feet of me, he'll be arrested." Sarah had learned all this from Janet Mills, who delivered each piece of bad news with the weary resignation of someone who'd seen the legal system's failures too many times. "So you got no money, no support, and a psychopath husband who's got the system working for him," Linda summarized. "That's about right," Sarah said. On her 3rd night in jail, Sarah woke to sharp pains in her lower back and wetness between her legs. "Something's wrong," she gasped, shaking Maria awake. Within minutes, the cell was in chaos. The corrections officers called for medical help, but the jail's medical facilities were minimal. Sarah was taken to the infirmary on a stretcher, pain racking her body as her baby fought to be born 7 weeks early. "Please," Sarah begged the overworked jail nurse. "Something's wrong. The baby's coming too early." "We're doing what we can," the nurse replied, but Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. They transported her to the county hospital, where she gave birth alone, in handcuffs, with a corrections officer standing guard outside her room. Her son was tiny but breathing, immediately whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit. "Can I see him?" Sarah pleaded with the doctors. "The baby is stable, but he needs specialized care." The doctor explained, "He's premature, but his lungs are developed enough that we're optimistic." "When can I hold him?" The doctor exchanged glances with the corrections officer. "Mrs. Blackstone, there are legal complications. Your husband has filed papers claiming you're an unfit mother. Until the court decides, you're telling me I can't see my own baby." "I'm sorry. The court order is very specific." Sarah stared at the ceiling of her hospital room, listening to the steady beep of monitors and the distant sound of crying babies whose mothers were allowed to hold them. Her arms ached with emptiness. Her breasts were full of milk for a child she wasn't permitted to feed, and her heart was breaking in ways she hadn't known were possible. David had won. He'd taken everything from her: her freedom, her reputation, her child, and her hope. But as she lay there in the sterile hospital room, guarded like a criminal while her newborn son fought for his life without his mother's touch, Sarah felt something else besides despair. She felt rage, pure, clean, righteous anger at the man who'd systematically destroyed her life and was now trying to steal her child. The same anger that had driven her to stand up to bullies when she was teaching, that had motivated her to fight for her students' futures. David thought he'd broken her completely, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten that she was Tommy Mitchell's daughter, raised to never surrender in the face of injustice. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sarah had been in jail for 6 days when Janet Mills arrived with unexpected news and an even more unexpected visitor. "The charges have been dropped," Janet announced, her usually grim expression brightening slightly. Sarah sat up on her cot, hardly daring to hope. "What, how?" "Someone posted your bail and provided new evidence that casts serious doubt on your husband's accusations. I don't understand all the details, but apparently your case has attracted some high-powered legal attention." Janet stepped aside, and a man in an expensive suit entered the cramped meeting room. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "Mrs. Blackstone, I'm Robert Chen, senior partner at Chen, Martinez and Associates. I've been retained to represent you." Sarah blinked in confusion. "I can't afford a lawyer like you. Your fees have been covered by a benefactor who wishes to see justice done," Chen replied smoothly. "Someone who's been following your case with great interest." "I don't understand. Who?" "That would be me," said a familiar voice from the doorway. Jimmy Rodriguez stepped into the room, but something was different about him. Gone were the casual clothes and humble demeanor she remembered. Instead, he wore a tailored suit and carried himself with quiet authority. "Jimmy," Sarah stood unsteadily, confused by his transformation. "Hello, Sarah. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary to protect both of us from your husband's reach." Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackstone, allow me to introduce James Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Holdings and one of the most successful venture capitalists on the West Coast." Sarah sank back onto her chair, staring at Jimmy in shock. "I don't understand. You're an Uber driver." Jimmy's smile was gentle but sad. "I drive for Uber sometimes. Yes, but not because I need the money. After I left the Marines, I started investing the money I'd saved during my deployments. I got lucky with some early tech investments, including a little company that later became Instagram." "But why?" Why was I driving Uber the night we met? Because I'd been tracking your husband's movements for months, waiting for the right opportunity to approach you safely. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process this revelation. You were following us. Following him, Jimmy corrected. Sarah, I told you that your father saved my life in Afghanistan. What I didn't tell you was that when he died, he left me something that changed my life forever. Jimmy pulled a folded letter from his jacket pocket, the paper yellowed with age. Tommy wrote this letter to be given to me if anything happened to him. In it, he told me about a small investment he'd made in a startup company, $5,000 that he'd scraped together because he believed in the founder's vision. Sarah took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing her father's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. The letter began, Jimmy, you're the best friend I ever had, and I'm trusting you with my most important treasure, my daughter Sarah's future. I made a small investment in a company that I think will be worth something someday. If I'm right, I want that money to go to Sarah for college and her future. Take care of my little girl. The company your father invested in was a small tech startup that later became one of the largest social media platforms in the world, Jimmy said quietly. His $5,000 investment is now worth about $300 million. Sarah stared at him, unable to process the numbers. I've been managing that money for 12 years, investing it, growing it, waiting for the right time to fulfill your father's wishes. The total value of Tommy's trust fund is now approximately $500 million. 500. Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. $1 million, Jimmy confirmed. You're not just wealthy. Sarah, you're one of the richest women in America. And now we're going to use every penny of it to destroy the man who hurt you and stole your child. Robert Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. We've already begun. In the past week, we've hired the best forensic accountants, digital investigators, and corporate attorneys money can buy. They've uncovered evidence that makes your husband's theft of Marcus Webb's work look like shoplifting. What do you mean? David Blackstone has been running a sophisticated corporate fraud scheme for years. The Marcus Webb case was just the beginning. We've found at least 6 other inventors and programmers whose work he's stolen, 3 companies he's destroyed through fraudulent lawsuits, and evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and securities fraud. Sarah's head was spinning. How is this possible? How did no one catch him before? Because he's very good at what he does, Chen replied. He targets vulnerable people, brilliant but isolated programmers, struggling inventors, people who can't afford to fight back. But he made a mistake when he targeted you. What mistake? Jimmy smiled grimly. He forgot to check if his victim had a guardian angel with unlimited resources and a very long memory. The FBI is already building cases against him based on our evidence, Chen continued. We expect multiple indictments within the week, but more importantly for you, we've filed for emergency custody of your son. Can I see him? Is he okay? He's thriving. The medical team says he's remarkably healthy for a premature baby. And yes, as soon as we leave here, we're going straight to the hospital. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of hope rather than despair. Jimmy, why didn't you tell me who you really were from the beginning? Because I needed to know who you really were first, he replied. Your father's letter asked me to take care of you, but he also asked me to make sure you grew up to be the kind of person worthy of his sacrifice. I needed to see that you were still Tommy's daughter, still willing to fight for what's right, even when it cost you everything. And am I still his daughter? I mean, Jimmy's smile was warm and proud. Sarah, when you chose to expose David's crimes, despite knowing it would destroy your comfortable life, when you refused to stay silent in the face of injustice, you proved that you're exactly the woman your father raised you to be. As they prepared to leave the jail, Sarah thought about her father, about the small investment he'd made in a company he believed in, about his faith in her future, even as he lay dying in a foreign country. Tommy Mitchell had saved Jimmy Rodriguez's life in Afghanistan. And now, 12 years later, Jimmy was returning the favor by saving Tommy's daughter. The war against David Blackstone was far from over, but now Sarah had an army. The FBI raid on David's penthouse made the evening news. Sarah watched from the comfort of Jimmy's guest house, her 2-week-old son sleeping peacefully in her arms. The reporters described it as one of the largest white-collar crime investigations in years, with evidence of fraud spanning nearly a decade. Federal agents carried out more than 20 boxes of evidence, the news anchor reported. Sources close to the investigation say the charges may include securities fraud, tax evasion, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy to defraud investors. Sarah looked down at her son. She'd named him Thomas James, after both his grandfather and the man who'd saved them both, and felt a deep sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. "How does it feel?" Jimmy asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Surreal," Sarah admitted. 3 weeks ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm watching my husband get arrested on national television while holding my healthy baby in a house that's nicer than anywhere I ever imagined living. Jimmy's guest house was actually a fully equipped cottage on his 50-acre estate in the hills outside Portland. Sarah had her own space, her own staff to help with the baby, and all the time and resources she needed to recover from her ordeal. "Any regrets?" Jimmy asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "About exposing David none at all. About marrying him in the first place." She shrugged. "If I hadn't married him, I wouldn't have Thomas, and I wouldn't have met you." "You would have met me eventually. I was always planning to find you when the time was right." "When would that have been?" "Probably around your 30th birthday. I figured that was old enough for you to handle the responsibility of significant wealth without it corrupting your character." Sarah laughed. "So all of this happened ahead of schedule. Way ahead of schedule. But I'm glad it did. You needed rescuing. And I needed to fulfill my promise to your father." The news continued with footage of Melissa Carter being led away in handcuffs. Apparently, her scheme to blackmail David had backfired spectacularly when the FBI discovered she'd been helping him launder money through offshore accounts. "What happens to all the money David stole?" Sarah asked. "Robert's working on that. The victims' families will be compensated first, including Marcus Webb's widow and children. The rest will probably be tied up in court for years." "And what happens to me?" Jimmy smiled. "That's entirely up to you. You have more money than you could spend in several lifetimes. You could travel the world, start a foundation, go back to school, anything you want." Sarah looked around the comfortable room, thinking about the possibilities. For the first time in her adult life, she had complete freedom to choose her own path. "I think I want to teach again," she said. Jimmy raised an eyebrows. "Really? You could do anything, and you want to go back to teaching." "Not exactly the same kind of teaching. I want to start a school, a place for kids whose parents are deployed military, or kids who've lost parents in service. A place where they can get an excellent education and the support they need to succeed." "That sounds like something your father would have loved." "That's the idea. the Thomas Mitchell Academy for Military Children. Sarah bounced her son gently as he began to stir. What do you think, little Thomas? Want to help Mommy build a school? The baby opened his eyes, bright blue like his father's, but warm and trusting rather than cold and calculating, and made a soft cooing sound. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the courtroom as the judge read David's sentence. 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. He'd aged dramatically during his incarceration, his perfect hair now gray and thinning, his expensive suits replaced by prison orange. As he was led away, David looked directly at Sarah for the first time since his arrest. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only rage and the bitter recognition that he'd been outplayed. Sarah felt nothing but pity for him. He'd had everything: wealth, intelligence, opportunity, and had chosen to use his gifts to destroy others. Now he would spend the next decade and a half watching other people live the life he'd thrown away. After the sentencing, Sarah drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. She'd had his body moved from Arlington to a small veterans cemetery near Portland, where she could visit regularly. "Hi, Daddy," she said, settling onto the grass beside his headstone with baby Thomas in her arms. "I thought you'd like to meet your grandson." She told him about the school they were building, about the scholarships they were creating for military families, about the life she was building from the foundation he'd laid with his small investment and his trust in Jimmy Rodriguez. "Jimmy kept his promise," she said. "He took care of me, just like you asked. And now I'm going to take care of other kids whose parents are serving or who've made the ultimate sacrifice." The baby gurgled happily, reaching up to grab at the autumn leaves falling from the oak tree that shaded his grandfather's grave. "I think he approves," Jimmy's voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find him approaching with flowers, simple daisies, the kind her father had always picked for her from roadside ditches when she was small. "Thank you," she said, accepting the flowers. "For everything. Thank you for letting me keep my promise to Tommy," Jimmy replied, "and for becoming the woman he always knew you could be." As they sat together in the peaceful cemetery, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from small-town teacher to millionaire's wife to single mother to one of the wealthiest women in America. Each step had been necessary. Each challenge had made her stronger. She was no longer the frightened woman who'd been abandoned on a highway. She was Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a hero, mother of the future, and guardian of her father's legacy. And she was just getting started. 2 years later, the Thomas Mitchell Academy for Military Children stood on a hill overlooking the Columbia River, its modern buildings designed to be both inspiring and welcoming. Sarah walked through the hallways during lunch hour, listening to the sounds of laughter and learning that filled every corner of her school. "Mrs. Sarah," called out Emma, a 12-year-old whose Marine father had died in Syria. "Look what I made in art class." Emma held up a watercolor painting of a soldier in uniform, clearly meant to represent her father. The pride and love in the child's eyes made Sarah's heart swell. "It's beautiful, Emma. Are you going to hang it in your room?" "Actually, I was thinking about giving it to Mr. Jimmy for his office. He collects pictures of heroes." "Right?" Sarah smiled. Jimmy had indeed filled his office with photographs and artwork created by their students, all depicting military service members past and present. "I think Mr. Jimmy would love that. He's in his office now if you want to give it to him." Emma scampered off, clutching her artwork, while Sarah continued her rounds. The school served 200 children, from kindergarten through 12th grade, all from military families. Many were scholarship students whose families couldn't otherwise afford private education. She stopped outside the advanced computer programming classroom, where their teacher was showing students how to code. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of these children might grow up to create the kind of innovations that David had spent his career stealing. But these children would be taught not just technical skills, but ethics and integrity. They would understand that true success came from creating value, not from destroying others. "Mommy," Thomas's voice echoed down the hallway as he ran toward her on sturdy 2-year-old legs. He was followed closely by Maria Santos, the former social worker who now served as the Academy's child development specialist. "Sorry, Sarah," Maria laughed. "He escaped from toddler time when he heard your voice." Sarah scooped up her son, marveling as always at how different he looked from his father. Thomas had David's blue eyes and strong jawline, but his expression was open and trusting, full of the joy and curiosity that David had never possessed. "Did you have fun in toddler time?" she asked. "We painted," Thomas announced proudly, holding up hands still streaked with blue and yellow. "Like Emmy." "Just like Emma," Sarah agreed. "Should we go wash your hands before we visit Grandpa Jimmy?" They made their way to Jimmy's office, where they found him examining Emma's painting with the serious attention he gave to all the children's artwork. "This is exceptional work," he was telling Emma. "Your father would be very proud." Emma beamed with pleasure, then noticed Thomas. "Thomas want to see my painting of my daddy." The two children bent their heads together, Emma explaining the details of her artwork while Thomas listened with the intense concentration he brought to everything. "How was the board meeting?" Sarah asked Jimmy quietly. "Productive. The expansion to Colorado is approved. We'll break ground on the Denver campus next spring." "And the scholarship fund?" "Fully endowed for the next 50 years, thanks to your father's investment portfolio continuing to grow." Jimmy smiled. "Tommy's $5,000 leap of faith is now worth over $1 billion. Sarah shook her head, still amazed by the magnitude of her father's accidental legacy. "Think he ever imagined it would turn into all this?" "I think he imagined exactly this. His daughter making a difference in the world, helping children who needed it most." That evening, after Thomas was asleep and the academy was quiet, Sarah walked through the memorial garden they'd built behind the main building. Stone markers honored fallen service members, each one representing a family that had been touched by their school. Her father's marker stood at the center of the garden, surrounded by flowering plants that bloomed year-round. The inscription read, "Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, beloved father, faithful friend, catalyst of dreams." "Hi, Daddy," she said, settling onto the bench facing his memorial. "Big day today. Emma's painting reminded me of all those pictures I used to draw of you when I was her age." She told him about the children's achievements, the new campus plans, and Thomas's latest adorable antics. These one-sided conversations had become a ritual, helping her process the overwhelming responsibility of managing such vast resources and impact. "I got a letter from David today," she said quietly. "His first parole hearing is coming up next year. He wants to see Thomas." She pulled the letter from her jacket pocket, reading the carefully crafted words that somehow managed to sound both penitent and manipulative. "He claims he's found God in prison, that he wants to make amends and be a father to his son." Sarah folded the letter back up. "I don't believe him, but Thomas will want to know about his biological father someday, and I'll have to figure out how to handle that." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around her father's memorial, and Sarah imagined she could hear his voice offering the wisdom she'd always relied on. "Trust your instincts. Sweetheart, you'll know what's right when the time comes. Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah turned to find Jessica Chen, her assistant and Robert Chen's daughter, approaching with a folder. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but these documents need your signature before tomorrow's foundation meeting." Sarah accepted the folder, scanning the papers by moonlight. More scholarships, more funding for military family support programs, more ways to honor her father's legacy. As she signed each document, she thought about the butterfly effect of choices and consequences. Her father's decision to invest $5,000 in a risky startup, Jimmy's promise to a dying friend, her own choice to stand up to David despite the personal cost. Each decision had rippled outward, creating waves of change that were still spreading. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jessica said hesitantly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The way everything happened, I mean. If you could go back and avoid marrying David, avoid all the pain, would you?" Sarah considered the question carefully, looking around at the school she'd built, thinking about the children whose lives were being changed, remembering her father's sacrifice that had made it all possible. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't change anything. The pain led me here, to this work, to these children who need us. My father always said that our hardest experiences often become our greatest opportunities to help others." He sounds like he was a wise man. He was, and he raised me to understand that real wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in the positive impact you have on other people's lives. As they walked back toward the main building, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd started as a small-town teacher who thought she needed rescuing from her simple life. She discovered that her simple life hadn't needed rescuing at all. It had needed expanding. Now she was doing exactly what she'd always been meant to do, teaching, nurturing, and helping young people discover their potential. The only difference was the scale of her impact and the resources at her disposal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jimmy. "Documentary crew confirmed for next month. Are you ready to tell Tommy's story to the world?" Sarah smiled, typing back, "Ready? It's time everyone knew about the best man who ever lived." The documentary about her father's life and legacy would air on Veterans Day, introducing the world to Sergeant Thomas Mitchell and the academy built in his honor. But more importantly, it would inspire other people to make their own small investments in causes they believed in, never knowing how those investments might grow and change the world. As Sarah locked up the school and headed home to her son, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from living a life aligned with her values. She'd been tested by betrayal, humbled by injustice, and elevated by unexpected blessings. But through it all, she'd remained Tommy Mitchell's daughter, a teacher at heart, committed to helping others discover their own strength and potential. The little girl who used to draw pictures of her soldier father had grown up to build a living monument to his memory, one that would touch thousands of lives for generations to come. And somewhere in the gentle evening breeze that rustled through the memorial garden, Sarah could swear she heard her father's voice, whispering the words he'd said to her every night when she was small. "Sleep tight, sweetheart. Tomorrow's going to be a beautiful day."